Folks, there's a few of you in the area. Let's get seated and we can get started. As you can see on screen, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'll let them introduce themselves, but once you all get seated, we can welcome Tracy on the stage. Okay, next up we have our panel. It's about career privileges, navigating our identities in a global setting. I'll welcome Tracy Wannicke from Boston Consulting Group. She's a management consultant, and she'll let you know what this panel is all about.
Well, thank you very much, Devin, for that lovely introduction. Nice to meet you all. I'm Tracy. I'm going to be your moderator for today. Before we get into it and we start to do the introductions, I just wanted to give a brief bit of context about what this panel is about and why we're here today. So when we're talking about queer privileges, what we're trying to get across is that even within the shared umbrella identity of LGBTQ+, what it means to be queer varies dramatically depending on your cultural identity, your background, and your geography, amongst other things. So while the Western world, for example, has experienced a great deal of success across same-sex marriage, changing of norms, 33 countries now have legalized same-sex marriage. Across the globe, we still have 69 countries in which being gay is completely illegal, and 11 of those in which the death penalty is an acceptable punishment for being gay. So what we want to do today is, with our panelists who have a great breadth of experience both in their personal and professional lives, start off by giving you a bit of context about who we are, our personal journeys, and how our identities have impacted our queer identities. Secondly, we want to talk a bit more about the global context, the LGBTQ movement in general, and how our needs and the movement's needs vary dramatically depending on place. And lastly, we just kind of want to leave all of you with some actionable takeaways and things that you can do in your kind of day-to-day life as someone in the working world, for example, to help our LGBTQ+ peers globally. So I think we're going to start off with some introductions. So I'll quickly say something and then I'll hand over to our lovely panelists on the screen. I'm Tracy. As Devin said, I'm a management consultant at BCG. I specialize mostly in the social impact work, but I also have experience in the public sector. And before BCG, I worked at the Department of Health and did a law degree. So I'll hand over to the screen. Also, my pronouns are she, her. Why don't we start with Hantao?
Sorry, can you guys hear me? Cool. Hello guys, I'm Hantao, consultant from BCG. Great to start the self-introduction as me. I have been being consultant for more than 3 years now. I personally really love this job, so great to be made as the panelist today. In terms of my personal story, I grew up in mainland China, lived and walked across mainland China, Hong Kong and London. In terms of my journey, I went to University of Oxford for uni. I think that was part of the journey that really shaped my thinking. And by moving to the UK as well, I've always been in this self-exploratory journey. I think still this journey is continuing, but I'm really willing to share my personal experience today and to and let you guys know how this journey has evolved. Thank you.
And next off, why don't we go to Maud?
Hi, my name is Maud. I'm from Micro Rainbow, born in Zimbabwe. I am a refugee in the UK. In terms of my journey, I went through the asylum system, which kind of really made me change my career from a teacher because of that experience, and the passion was born to work and support refugees. So this is where I am at the moment. We work with LGBTQI asylum seekers and refugees, mainly in housing and tackling homelessness. I manage our current housing program, which is national. And more recently, I've worked with the LGBTQI people from Afghanistan who were recently evacuated and integrating in the UK. I also work with UK Black Pride as one of the founding members, and I'm the current chair there. I'm looking forward to this panel.
And next up, Jeff.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Jeff. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the CEO, which I call Chief Empathy Officer and founder of The Inclusion Imperative, which is an independent diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy specializing in LGBTQ plus inclusion advisory work for commercial organizations. And which I set that organization up this year. Prior to that, for 35 years, I worked in financial services, finishing up at Macquarie Bank, where I was a managing director in the front office for about 9 years, and very proud to take Macquarie to #1 in this year's Stonewall rankings before I left them. Over the course of my life, I've lived in lots of different countries. Apart from the UK, where I'm from, I've also lived in Spain, in Canada, where I'm currently sitting with my husband is Canadian, also in the Netherlands, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And one of my side of desk roles currently, if you like, is as trustee of a UK LGBTQ plus charity called EUROUT, which facilitates giving to activist organizations on the ground in countries where it is extremely perilous to be LGBTQ plus. So I'm looking forward very much to the debate today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Busy.
Hello, everybody, and I think it's almost afternoon here in Lagos. My name is Bisi Alimi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Bisi Alimi Foundation, an LGBT organization registered in England and Wales and also in Nigeria, with the sole aim to accelerate social acceptance of LGBT plus people. And the idea behind our work is to make sure that we position LGBT people at the center of discourse and make them the people that voice the issues that concerns them and lead narratives that are written about them. Of recent, we started investing in LGBT businesses in Nigeria. I'm also the founder of a diversity and inclusion company registered here in Nigeria called Zihoni. And the whole idea behind it, because Zihoni is a word for elephant, and the whole idea behind it for me is that diversity and inclusion, most especially in corporate Nigeria, where some of you or some of your companies have a part of, that D&I is a big elephant in the room. And I'm working with companies to recognize the presence of this elephant and to make them understand that that elephant is not dangerous if you address it. But if you don't address it, it can grow too big and it can destroy everything and everyone on its path. So the earlier you address that elephant, the better for everyone.
Well said. And before we kind of continue, I thought it might be nice to hear a bit more about the personal stories and background of some of our panelists. So, Maud, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your journey and how in your upbringing and working life, your cultural context and global experience has impacted your identity?
Sure. I think in terms of my journey growing up, it was quite difficult for me and confusing. I guess, there was a young lesbian and living in a very strict religious environment in Zimbabwe. And again, I was constantly living in shame for having these feelings for other women. And, as you grow up, this is illegal. You start to hear stories of things happening to people who are like you. So then, to shame is added that fear. And you start to experience the pressure to change, the pressure to get married, the pressure to sort of conform to heterosexuality. So it was such a difficult journey. And then obviously moving to the UK again, where I felt a bit safer and meeting other lesbians, joining UK Black Pride. But then, however, then comes this other side of going through the asylum system, which is not a safe space in terms of housing with other refugees, again, having to hide myself, although at that time I was an activist and already working with UK Black Pride, and having to kind of separate sometimes my identities depending on where I was. Then having to fight in terms of proving myself. How do you prove that you're a lesbian? Having to prove that to the Home Office, having to answer questions such as, you know, how are you a lesbian when you have a child? So it was another sort of journey where you kind of feel unsafe, and you have to really. It's an inhumane space, I guess. But the good ending of it is, you know, when I was granted status, I became so passionate about helping other LGBTI people who go through this system where, you know, if you are visibly identified as different, you can be abused by other refugees and you have to prove yourself. At that time, when I claimed asylum, the refusal rate for LGBT asylum seekers by the Home Office was 99%. I think now it's down to 70%. So it was quite difficult. And then in terms of behavior, as a Black African lesbian, a refugee woman, I have sort of many intersecting identities. So again, it's editing myself depending where I am. You know, if I'm within my community, sometimes if I don't feel safe, then I hide myself and I'm someone else. And coming to the UK, Zimbabwe, I was, you know, I was never sort of aware of any kind of race issues. But coming to the UK, suddenly having to learn about racism, or why is this happening, and learn about this kind of different issues of race within the country. I have to now, you know, have that to deal with as a woman as well. It's another sort of different context. As a mother, there's all these different spaces I'm placed in my identities, and having to kind of behave differently. So this, in a nutshell, has been my life and the journey towards it, and how it's influenced, obviously, my working life, including, as I said, our housing for refugees is something I became very passionate about after realizing that even after claiming asylum in the safer countries, LGBTI asylum seekers were not safe. You know, they're getting abused from other refugees. You know, there was homophobic abuse, sexual violence. So it became really important to do this work and to find and provide safe accommodation. Maybe I'll stop for now and give others a chance to respond to this question.
That would be really great. And I think we're going to hear a bit more from Maud later on in the panel about the incredible activism work that she does. I think before we move on to the next question, maybe Busy, if you'd like to also give a bit of context on your journey, as well as any thoughts and comments on what Maud's just shared.
Yeah, so hey, Maud. Maud is my sister, so I need to pay homage to that strong Black African woman. Like Maud, I came to the UK in 2007, and my coming was actually in two stages. The first time I came to the UK was to attend the CHAPS conference. For many of you who are aware of that, the CHAPS conference used to be the HIV conference hosted by Terence Higgins Trust. And I was brought here because of the work that I was doing around HIV and gay men in Nigeria. That was beginning around 2004. So in 2007, I was brought here to talk about that work. And that kind of, I was excited. I was really excited coming to the UK. And part of my coming to the UK was that I was going to do some media runs. So I did a lot of media in my excitement. But let me pause and just take a step back. About 2.5 years before then, I had come out on the national television in Nigeria, just at the beginning of my acting career. So I went to the university to study performing arts. And I started out acting on TV, and there were a lot of pressure on me because of my sexuality or the speculation of it. And there was so much pressure that the best way for me to handle this was to come out in 2004. And to put it into perspective, UK just approved civil partnership when I came out in Nigeria. And that was hard. I lost immediately, that was the end of my acting career. I lost every opportunity to act again. I remember it was so bad because we just finished, the first season of the soap was just coming to an end. And we were already getting set to be back in camp for shooting season 2 when I got the call that I shouldn't even bother coming on set anymore. And as someone that spent 4 years, a lot of my life wanting to be an actor, but also someone that has an emotional connection to the stage, because the stage was my safest place growing up. The ability for me to become something else, to become someone else, because I was always afraid of becoming myself, of being myself, because of the society that I was growing up in. So the stage gave me the opportunity to act and become something else. And also because I went to an all-boys school. And the joke was then that, you know, if we had to do a play, we need women, and they will always be happy to make me a woman. And I will always be happy to act that, because for once I can be a woman without having to explain to anyone why I am a woman. But it also gives me the opportunity to explore my sexuality and my sexual orientation as well. So when I came out, I lost my job. I had to go into NGO work. And then I came to the UK. I did all those interviews. I went back to Nigeria, was detained for 24 hours at the airport by the Nigerian security immigration. Released after that, went to my house. A month later, I experienced a horrific violence attack. And 2 days later, I was back in the UK. I was back in the UK. I had no idea where I was going to stay. I had no idea what is actually ahead of me. I didn't come to the UK with the aim of claiming asylum. I didn't even know as of 2004 of anything called asylum. And I'm saying this because there is always the rhetoric that people are coming here because, you know, they want to come and take over our land. And I think that's extremely important to understand the journey of refugees and people who seek asylum. And so I came here in 2007. It wasn't until it was 2008, after going through a lot in the UK. It was a lot. Most of that 2007 and early 2008, I was homeless. I was sleeping on the street. And there was a huge regret because I'd run away from my country for fear of being killed. And then I came here and I had to endure so many things, including racism. And I know that Maud alluded to it. And I always tell people, I never knew I was Black until I came to the UK. And understanding what it means to be Black and dealing with that reality of Blackness was something that was too much for me. And I mean, I got my papers. I applied for asylum in 2008. I got my paper. I got my refugee status. By 2015, I became a British citizen. But throughout this period, I was learning a lot from organizations like Stonewall, like HRC in the US. I was involved with organizations like GLAD. I was learning a lot, and I felt I needed to take some of this experience back to Nigeria. I needed to, in my own small little way, redefine what activism is. And so that was what led me to set up the BC Alimi Foundation. Now I shuttle between Lagos and Nigeria with the hashtag rich, famous, and gay, because now that they think I'm rich, now that they think I'm famous, I can get away with being gay. And we'll talk about privilege later.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. And that leads on brilliantly into our next question, which is just, we'd like our panelists to speak a bit more about how the needs of the LGBTQ+ movement vary across the globe, as well as what we think it's important for people in more privileged positions to be aware of. There's something that Jeff has a lot of experience with, both in your working life as well as your kind of status as a trustee for various charities. Jeff, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks very much, Tracy. I mean, it's so interesting listening to the lived experiences of people like Busy and Maud. It's quite humbling for someone like myself who, Busy has just mentioned the word privilege, and I'm sitting here with layers of privilege, being a sort of middle-aged, middle-class, white cis man. I just happen to be LGBTQ plus, and that's my one minority characteristic. But it is one which is very important, and it does shape my perception and my experience of the world. And it's very easy to assume that those of us who have some privilege have not had to struggle, and we have. I mean, it's everything is relative in life. So I'm not sitting here comparing my story with those who just heard, for example. But when I was born in the UK, it was still illegal to be gay in the UK, and I grew up in my young adult life in a UK where we had the Thatcher government, which was promulgating the Section 28 legislation, which basically effectively created a division between the LGBT community and the rest of the world, basically saying that being gay was a pretend family relationship and should not be promoted in any way in the arts and schools, etc. And it's coming back now. I mean, so there's an awful lot of hatred in the UK now, directed primarily at the moment towards the trans community. And look what's happening in the US with the "Don't Say Gay" bills coming up, etc. So what we would consider to be the more developed part of the world in this context, places like the UK and the US have far from got their houses in order, and we shouldn't just assume that everybody in those countries is good to go because we have, at least for now, equal marriage, for example. If the Supreme Court in the US doesn't get its hands on that, hopefully they won't. But it's quite it is important to think that everything is relative, and those are perhaps literally first world problems. And with the forthcoming World Cup in Qatar is a good eye opener for those of us. Having very important government ministers talking about LGBT being damage in the mind, as they were just a few days ago. That's a reminder of the sort of attitudes that we are up against in countries which, where it's still a problem. And as Tracy mentioned earlier, I mean, I think it's 69 countries at the moment where it's still illegal to be gay, and 11 where that's potentially punishable by the death penalty. We obviously still have an awfully long way to go. Now, I've worked in many places around the world, and that includes Singapore, where I've lived there twice for a total of 3 years, and during both of those times, it was illegal to be gay, and I was effectively openly gay at that point. Now, it was never enforced in Singapore. The legislation about it being illegal has never been enforced, and recently it's been overturned, so it is now not illegal anymore. But it was a very major constraint on your sense of freedom and the ability to operate as your authentic self. And I felt I was having to put brakes on who I was, not only in the workplace, but just operating in social life. You would check yourself before you'd say anything, effectively doing an awful lot of code switching and self-regulation in every situation, because it was too dangerous not to do that. And if you look at the situation for people on the ground all around the world, that is extremely, extremely the case in a lot more countries, in a lot worse situations than Singapore ever was in that regard. And we've heard some examples of it already. That's really important. Now, while I'm talking about Singapore, let's remind ourselves of what might be considered a success story, because, the obvious thing here is, do we want to just sit here and say how bad it is in the situation in countries like that, or more constructively, what can we do about it? And there is something we can do as LGBTQ plus individuals like myself, sitting in, privileged positions in countries like the UK and Canada, where I currently am. We have economic capital, and we have social capital, and we should be making use of them. As fairly senior sort of people like myself, managing director in a bank prior to setting up my own company, I have a certain amount of economic clout, and if I choose to spend my time and money and wherewithal, strategically, I can actually bring pressure to bear. But we can do a lot more from a social capital perspective. I mean, you may argue that a country like Qatar, for example, it really wouldn't matter to them if I didn't go there and spend my pounds, because they're not exactly a poor country. But social capital can have a really important impact. And And we should be using the organizations that we work for as severe pressure points in this regard. You know, they can be organizational role models for the rest of the world. And that's really what happened in Singapore. Singapore, you know, it's a very conservative country, although it's been repealed. It remains a very conservative country, and it was only really flying in the face of those laws that pressure was able to be put through the social capital of organizations to make that change. And that was done in part by the introduction of Pink Dot about 12 years ago, I think it was now. Pink Dot is basically, you know, the Pride celebrations in Singapore. And it was always looked at a bit askance by the Singaporean authorities because, you know, it was illegal to be LGBTQ plus there, albeit not enforced, as I said. They didn't really like it. And after a few years, they tried to kill it by saying, well, look, this has really been started by an awful lot of foreign sponsorship, people like Google and Facebook and a few large banks. So we're not going to allow foreign sponsorship anymore. That's out. Well, unfortunately, for them, the cat was out of the bag. You know, things weren't. You know, toothpaste was not going back in the tube, and you know the flag for Pink Dot was picked up by local organisations very, very actively, and Pink Dot continued to exist and to thrive, and was a major catalyst in the change of law just a few weeks ago. So it can work using your social capital, pressuring organisations to act as agents of change. This can have a big difference. We've seen it in the US as well. I mean, a few years ago, those of you might remember, I think it was North Carolina introduced their bathroom bill, which was basically, you know, an anti-trans measure. And a lot of companies just said, well, fine, we're not going to do business there anymore. And this is important. You know, if we as people who work for these organizations, and particularly young people who are bringing in new energy to organizations, use your capital internally to make sure that companies know that this is something you expect them to be doing.
Thank you, Jeff. And on that point, Maud, would you be able to talk a little bit more about what kind of things you think people in more privileged positions, whether it's kind of within their organization or within their day-to-day life, can do to provide more support to the LGBTQ plus movement globally?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, for talking about the economic side of things. I think one of the things that we kind of sometimes don't look at is the activists themselves working on the ground in those geographies, is that they are unable to get employment because they're out there, they're known. So they won't have that financial means to support themselves, but yet they're pushing on with the work, and the work needs support in terms of money, but in terms also of social capital. I think that is not only essential, but it's also having conversations with people on the ground on how they can support. Every country is different. What works here might not work in Zimbabwe, might not work in another country because we have different cultures. There are politics to consider. So it's always important for those who want to support or those who are working to support, even if it's like, on a personal level or within their companies or organizations, to really reach out to activists on the ground to ask the questions: what works and how can we support? How can we use our privilege? Let the people who know the culture lead the work. Because it's not only about changing the laws, it's about changing the hearts and minds of people. So the activists on the ground really need to be the guides in terms of the approach to the movement, or how they're leading the movement, or what really works. People with privilege can only follow, support, and amplify their voices. I think that's my thoughts on that, on how we can support the movement. It's really working with people on the ground and respecting that the culture is different. What works here might not work there.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. And moving on to the next question. So one thing that's important to keep in mind with this is it's not just geography which can impact how your queer identity manifests in the workplace. It's also sometimes about cultural identity, regardless of what country you're in. So next question was just wondering if Hantao, so as Hanta and I are lucky enough to work at BCG London, and many of you will potentially be working at companies in the global north which have kind of ostensibly accepting environments for LGBTQ plus people like Pride networks. Would you be able to speak a little bit about how queer identity is impacted by cultural identity in the workplace and kind of what you think companies can do to make being out and being LGBTQ plus more comfortable for people of all backgrounds?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm in a really privileged position to be able to answer that question, actually. I think there's, two parts. First is what you really personally feel. And second is how you feel that the environment/organization is supporting how you really feel. So to me, I didn't really spend that much time working in Asia, but I've heard, from my friends and former colleagues in there. So basically, sometimes they don't feel that they're supported by the organization by not having a network internally. They don't really feel that they have the full support from senior leadership to be able to do initiatives that related to their identity. So I think in this context, I'm really lucky to be in an organization that we have senior leadership sponsoring, diversity inclusion initiatives in the office. I'll go into details about that. So to me personally, having that reassurance from senior leadership definitely helps me to be more comfortable with who I am and, how open I am to colleagues. Because, I've seen that people succeed in organizations who've shared identities with their colleagues. So that comes to my first point, is having senior leadership, in a Pride context is important. Secondly is, how do we codify this? I think having a Pride network organization is very important. Not just about having a network, but a network with budget or sponsorship to do activities together. For example, that we have, on our London level, our European level, on our global level, we all have different nodes of Pride networks that do monthly drinks, that we do events where people just interact with each other. So I used to think that this is not as important as it actually is, because I just thought there might be just some corporate norms that these companies claim to do. But actually, once you're in the environment, it's really reassuring to be with people that you really feel that you are sort of feeling relevant with, resonated with. So that's the second thing, is having sponsorship to actually do stuff together. And with these two factors, that naturally led to the third thing I was going to say, which is, how I openly feel with colleagues. I got introduced to the Pride Network at BCG with a colleague, which I personally didn't perceive that, that person was part of the LGBT network. So I didn't do a good job in, being open enough, because I had a certain assumption of what people really are. But after we opened up, after a few, I took a bit of risks to open up myself about who I really am. And that person was really open and supportive in telling me, oh, this network exists. And then I got introduced to the network leadership and realized that there was a group of us in London, in Europe, and in the world that, that we have, initiatives together. So I got the, chance to, to support EUROUT, this event, and got invited to panelists. So this has actually been my journey. And then I feel supportive, encouraged, and I share this news to my project team. Initially, I wasn't really feeling comfortable with sharing, doing these things with project team, because, the environment, but then I was really surprised that they're really supportive, and I felt so inclusive in that context. So I guess, this is, this is all about how we personally feel and how we, overcome our fear of not being ourselves in a work context, because, it's a high pressure environment. At times you feel that, you need to sort of be the best of yourself, and that best of yourself is defined as your, perceptions of how you want to be perceived, etc. So I really think that, having a network of people with senior leadership, with definitely codified policies that, were supportive, it's very important. Tracy, I hope that answered this question.
Thank you very much, Chantal. So we have just over 5 minutes until we're going to move on to Q&A and take some questions from the audience as well as people on Zoom. But before we do that, Busy, would you be able to comment a bit more on what you think can make a difference, both for those navigating being queer in spaces or from backgrounds where it's not so accepting, as an individual as well as organizations?
Thank you very much, Tracy. I think that one of the ways to answer this question is try not to generalize. And I will explain what I mean by that. Because if we pick up from some of the things that Jeff said and look at what I've said and look at what Maud have said and look at what Chantal has said, you will understand that there are stages in our lives that we are put in a position of risk when it comes to our sexual orientation and gender identity. And privilege, I do understand that it could create a sense of unsettling for certain people, because they have experienced certain things in their lives that they feel like we override because of the physical presentation. I know so many white gay men in this country that have experienced almost similar things to what many people on the continent of Africa would have experienced, maybe because they live in Middlesbrough, they live in the middle of nowhere, where the understanding of the conversation, sorry if you're from Middlesbrough, that was not a dig at you, but where the conversation around sexual orientation and gender identity is not comparable to what you have in the UK. So it's not my place to say because somebody presents whiteness that they do not understand what it means to experience homophobia. But I think that the issue, Maud said it very well, the issue then being that, we all experience this homophobia. And we can talk about it, we can unpack it as a community, we can share our experiences without in any way undermining anyone's experiences. But there are other characteristics that then make being even much more challenging. And that could be because you are a cis woman or you are a trans woman. It could be because you're Asian or because you're Black. It could be because you have a sense of disability or you come from a low income household. And all of these factors will come together to compound the challenges of acceptance or rejection based on your sexual orientation and gender identity. And this is where what Chantal said is very important. We need people who have positions, who have authorities, who have power, to first of all demystify the conversation. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the Commonwealth Games flag bearing, which was a quite historical moment in the history of the Commonwealth Game. At the opening ceremony, when Tom Daly and a group of us, including Maud as well, carried the rainbow flag at the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games. Tom used his privilege, his position, to be able to do that. If I had written to the Commonwealth and said, I want to carry a rainbow flag, maybe they would not reply to my email forever. But Tom understood his position. He understood the fact that, they will listen to him because he's an athlete of honor and he can use that position to change narratives. And so when I'm doing advocacy, I look for those gatekeepers who are respected, who are currency, and who can listen and can explain what the issues are. And many of you who are seated in the audience today, you're going to face that when you graduate and you find yourself, or maybe you're already working in establishment and you want change to happen. You're going to get a lot of pushback. And what is going to make your change easier or difficult is about your relationship with people who have power. I am fortunate. I'm really, really fortunate. I just registered my company in Nigeria in June. I already have 3 clients in this country who really want to reevaluate their diversity and inclusion. But because I'm taking it at an intersectional level, but I'm also happy to have people who have invested their trust in me and my ability to be able to do things. I'm able to make change happen. So identifying those people, engaging with those people, conversing with those people is such a very powerful thing, because sometimes we forget that culture is not static. And I am tired of using culture as a benchmark for the reason not to change. People do change culture when they have power and it is not in their interest. So when you don't have power and culture is undermining you, look for the people that have power, that are in your corner. Encourage them, educate them, engage with them, and change that culture. Don't take the culture for what it is, because it should not be that way.
Very powerful words from Busy. And let's have a round of applause for all of our panelists before we move on to Q&A. Is that me? Okay, so we have about 15 minutes to take some questions from the audience. I think we might get some questions from Zoom as well, but from the room, if people could put their hands up. I think we have someone up here.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for speaking. Listening to some of your personal experiences is incredibly moving and inspirational, so thank you. I have a question for Jeff, and I think it was really sort of poignant what you were saying about using your own organization to influence and use that kind of social capital. There are a lot of people in this room who'll be graduating, joining large organizations, early, mid-careers. How can you raise that conversation with senior management? There will be pushback. Maybe they're doing business in a country that, has, very strict sort of anti-LGBTQ laws. How do you kind of have that conversation, and how would you kind of encourage people to, raise it while people may be very hesitant to do so?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I completely agree with that being an imperative. And actually, what Busy was just saying and Hantao before him actually are very instructive in this regard. And it's really about finding the pressure points within the organization and leveraging them, because if there are pockets of allyship, of advocacy, of support within the organization, do your best to find them and do your best to leverage them. And that's where employee resource groups come into play, and galvanizing and creating a groundswell of sentiment which executives will listen to. Tap into that and find those potential change makers, and leverage their potential influence. They have the influence, they have the wherewithal, they are the potential change makers themselves. And often a way to do that is take it out of the debate around morality, and say, look, obviously this is the right thing to do. Everybody should be on board with that message. Quite often, unfortunately, it does take dollars and cents, if you like, for people to pay attention. I spend an awful lot of my time talking to organizations about the detriment they are doing themselves, not only the staff, but also themselves, by not being inclusive of people who've got differences that they will bring to bear. Conversations around celebrating differences rather than just tolerating or just marginally accepting them. It's a wasted opportunity. And if you can have that conversation with people, it may just sort of open a few eyes, that they will listen to you a little bit more. And then you can bring in the aspect around why it is important from every other perspective, including the moral and human-centric perspectives, to have full inclusion and celebrate difference rather than at best accept it, but quite often barely tolerate it. We should expect more of our organizations, and that's why we're saying use your influence within organizations to get change. But I do accept you sometimes have to play the long game. It's not going to happen overnight, but do find those pockets within the organization, certainly places like BCG or my old shop Macquarie. They are there, and they just take a little bit of due diligence to find them, and then see what you can do about leveraging those the platforms that are already there, and developing those, reaching out to people who can help you with the change that you're trying to create. Quite often they're allies. They're not necessarily people within the community, and the allies can have an additional benefit in as much as people will listen to them because they're coming at it from a perspective which is not one of vested interest, if you like. It is they're understanding that there is value to be had in being inclusive of people who've got minority characteristics. So sorry, long answer to a short question, but do what you can to find the pockets of potential energy and leverage and influence and leverage those internally when you can.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another question from the audience, maybe? Okay.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you to all the panelists. It's been really, really insightful. I guess one of the questions I had in that vein was, given the conversation that's been recently going around Peter Thatchell and his protest in Qatar, you shared some really, really great comments around what people that are from more privileged countries can do to help activists globally. I guess, do you have any examples of specifically things that you've seen done that have not been helpful in some of your respective countries? And I guess that's mainly focused at Bissy and Maud.
Great. Maud, would you like to kick us off?
I was going to hand over that to BC, who has so much experience in this.
Maud, this is not fair. This is not fair. but honestly,
BC's work is amazing at it, and he pushes on with that. So sorry, I'm handing this to you.
But honestly, I think I've been trying not to get involved in the Peter Thatchell saga about Qatar because it's a very controversial issue. But I'm just going to put it in a way that did no one any good. And personally for me, and this is my personal opinion, I see it as a white saviorism approach. And it wasn't just me. The LGBT group on the ground in Qatar were quite upset about the fact that Peter had to do that. And that is an example of where trying to intervene in a situation with a good intention can actually give us a bad result. Another example, because you asked, let me give you another example. It was 2010, after years of being in government, and Jeff made reference to it, of not voting for same-sex marriage, of not voting for civil partnership, of not voting for civil partnership because there was no same-sex marriage at that time, of not voting for civil partnership, of voting in support of Section 28, of refusing to vote for unification of age of consent. The Tory party, with the help of the Liberal Democrats, got into power in United Kingdom. And there was a whole lot of conversation around the role that the Commonwealth is playing. And some of us were very vocal around countries that are funding our countries that are giving international aid to reevaluate the way that aid is given and the role that aid is playing in militarizing our government to spy on us, to arrest us, and to detain us. And the Commonwealth head of government was going to happen. I think it was happening in Australia, I think, whether Australia or Canada. And David Cameron got on stage. I remember that very well, because when that disaster happened, we had to quickly intervene and said, UK will never give aid to any country that criminalizes same-sex relationship in the Commonwealth. And immediately that caused massive backlash on the LGBT community. Because the narrative in our countries were very simple. Because of LGBT people, maternal health would be a danger. Because of LGBT people, the progress we're making in the area of getting education to girls would be in danger. Building of hospitals would be in danger. Building of good roads to move food from one area to another and health facilities from one area to another would be in danger. We told you that this LGBT thing is a Western agenda and you can see it for yourself. And David Cameron spent the next month and years trying to do damage control. But to all of us that have been left at the eye of the storm, we were left there. Because I will be very honest with you, less than 1% of UK's aid actually goes to LGBTQI plus issues. And yet we have a man who is saying that, we are going to be this massive savior of the world, which to me, I said was an idea of neo-colonization or neo-imperialism. The idea that this tiny little island can speak to the world and tell the world to keep themselves in check or else we'll come back and bully you again. And this is the problem that I have in the area of interventionism, that conversations are not hard. And Maud talked about it. Talk to the people on the ground. Ask, what can we do and how do we need to do this? And sometimes what you need to do is put money where your mouth is. I cannot believe that in 2022, more than 75% of LGBT organizations within the Commonwealth employ people on voluntary basis. If you don't understand what that means, let me tell you, activism is poverty for LGBT people. These are the same people that we said we want to support, we want to save, but they had to do this work without being paid. And they live in a capitalist world where they have to pay rent, they have to pay electricity, they have to pay all their bills, and they are immediately impacted by the reality of this hate. Meanwhile, in New York, in Paris, in London, organizations are raising millions and millions and millions using the stories of these people, and the money is never getting to them. We need to reconvene and have a different conversation around how aid is doing. And this is in no way patronizing. And for disclosure, yes, we get money from EUROUT. EUROUT as being one organization that has and is redefining how we support local activists on the ground. And until we understand those things, that we're not going to fight and we're not going to win this battle without money. And I'm going to end with this data. For every £1 or $1 you give to an LGBT organization in the global south, the right-wing Christian evangelical gives £5 to push back on LGBT narratives. It's not about carrying a flag and going to Qatar to stand on the road and demand that the World Cup shouldn't stand there. It's about what is our investment in LGBT activism in Qatar. It's about what is our investment in having conversation with our own government about their relationship when it's come to oil in Qatar. And how can we redefine trade in a way that is empathic? How can we redefine international aid in a way that is empathic? It goes beyond carrying flag and doing stunts. I'll stop there.
Tracy, can I come back in for a second there?
Go for it, Jeff.
Thank you, Bizzy. That was very, very moving actually to listen to that. I did want to pick up on the points you just made and the point that Maud made earlier actually, which was really about, using activists on the ground. They know best. It's as simple as that. That's the point that Bizzy was just making and Maud was saying earlier. And what they don't need is people like, people who look broadly like me coming in telling them how to do stuff. They know their local situation better than I ever will. What they need is help. They need resources, and that's where we should be prioritizing. As Bizzy was just really suggesting, we don't necessarily need, well-intentioned though it is by the likes of David Cameron and Peter Tatchell, to be doing big barnstorming, things like that, because it can actually be detrimental. What would be better is to use the infrastructure that is in place and to improve that infrastructure to get resources to people on the ground who are actually in better position to undertake the activism, which will be done more sensitively to the local environment and culture. And as I mentioned earlier, and Busy's just mentioned it as well, GiveOut is an organization in the UK, which, if you don't know about it, full disclosure, just to remind everyone, I am a trustee of it, so I am very biased, but it's an organization which facilitates giving to international activist organizations on the ground in countries where it's very perilous to be LGBTQ+, and does so in a way which effectively creates the quality control. You haven't got to do it yourself as to find out, where those funds are going and whether or not those organizations are appropriate to receive those funds. That due diligence has been done by GiveOut for you. And I'll also mention, as I mentioned at the start, I used to be a managing director at Macquarie, and one of the things I did at Macquarie before I left, which I did also in conjunction with GiveOut, was to set up an annual event called City for LGBT, which is a gathering in the city, which is effectively a live crowdfunding event, which raises funds for a number of charities, different charities every year, specifically with a view to getting money to activist organizations on the ground. So I do encourage people. I was talking about social capital earlier. There is a lot that can be done in terms of economic capital as well, but make sure you do it in a way which is sensibly aligned to the way that progress is best going to be made on the ground, and that is working with local organizations rather than trying to take over the role. Use them because they know what they're doing. They just need our help with resources.
Thank you very much, everyone. So we only have about a minute left. So I think rather than going to another question, I'm just going to ask our panelists to, in 1 or 2 sentences, just quickly say something which they'd like everyone in the room and on the Zoom today to take away, whether it's something that they should go home and look up tonight, or whether it's something they should continue to consider as they move forward in their career. So why don't I start with Maud?
Thank you. I think for me, I would say what is passionate for me, please do engage with LGBTQI asylum seekers and refugees, support them, volunteer for charities, give us your time, and also ensure that you're supporting them in their moving on and employment. And while we're also here, there are issues still in the UK in terms of LGBTQI homelessness. We have a lot of LGBTQI young people who are homeless. There are organizations such as Albert Kennedy Trust that you can support. Let's amplify the voices of people who are trans in the UK who are still fighting their own battles and challenges. There's still also a lot of issues, and we can support those causes and engage with others in the movement within the UK.
Thank you very much. And a sentence from Hanta?
For me, as I said, take a bit of risks to be yourself, and reflecting what Jeff said and Mood and BC said earlier. Find the point of contact in an environment would really help you. And yeah, I'm here to feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or I'll be in the conference later if you have any questions about how I really feel and how organizations can support. I'm happy to talk further. But yeah, that's the key takeaway today.
And Jeff?
I would say, on a similar note, find the power players, if you like. Find the people who've got the influence within your organizations to help really boost the presence and the importance of inclusion, both internally and externally. There's nothing wrong with people who are much more junior making an effort to effectively reverse mentoring towards more executive people who've been around for 30, 40 years and aren't as across this space. Use your knowledge, which they don't have. Share your knowledge with them. Get them educated so that they can be better influences for the change that you would like to achieve internally and externally. So make the best of the opportunities you've got internally and leverage them.
Thank you. And lastly, Busy.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave you with 4 things. One is that volunteer your time is extremely important. There are so many organizations that really want to take their advocacy to the next level that do not have this kind of skills that you have gotten in the business school. Look for those organizations. They don't have to be in the UK. Thanks to the world of virtual working, you can give your time, whether in the area of management, in the area of fundraising, in the area of networking, that you can use to, help these organizations to go to the next level. Give your money. There's no amount of money that is too small. We've mentioned 3 organizations on this call. There's Micro Rainbow, there's EUROUT, and there's the BC Alumni Foundation. Visit their website, look at the work that they're doing, ask yourself, how can I contribute to the amazing work that these organizations are doing? Hantao has talked about taking risk. Take that risk, because you never know where it's going to land you, and you never know how it's going to change not just your life, but the life of other people that you are going to be working with, or they are going to be coming into the space that you are living, because that's very, very important. And lastly, I'm going to say this: there is nothing wrong with having privilege. Don't be ashamed of having privilege. Recognize it. What is unfair about having privilege is not using it. Recognize it, embrace it. You can't do anything about it because it's given to you naturally, but you can use it to make the world a better place. And I hope that you will do at the end of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Can we just take a moment to recognize Tracy did a wonderful job with grace and charisma moderating this amazing panel. So let's give another round of applause. Thank you. Okay, we have another 10-minute break, so be back here for 12 p.m. And this panel is sponsored by Wheeler Institute for Business and Development. Just want to make sure that we recognize that, so thank you. And hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks to the panelists.
Thank you very much.